Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place.
G'day team, I hope this finds you well. In our last episode, I shared with you the recording of one of our Platinum Mastermind monthly growth calls, focusing in on that question, are you under-resourced in your farm business? I hope you found that of value. To complement that, I'm going to share another growth session recording with you. This one was from August 2020, where I spoke with Cy Harris, who is a really high-performing business coach and a great mate to Andrew Roberts and I. And we explore the topic of farm cultures. Now, we all have one, whether we like it or not. And within our business and within our family, even within our part in our community, and leaving our culture unchecked can be a disaster. Accepting a suboptimal culture can be destroying for you and for those around you. And at Farm Owners Academy, we believe deeply in creating high-performing on-farm cultures, family and business. And so in this session, great to connect with Cy Harris to explore what is company culture, what are the 6 types of cultures that we might have or might create, how does yours rate, and what can we do to improve the culture that we have in the businesses that we run. There are some systems and structures that we can put in place and some rituals and disciplines that we can put in place that can support high performance. And there's so much we can learn around this from high-performing businesses, sporting teams and other. So enjoy this session with Cy Harris and look forward to hearing how you rate and consider the culture that you're creating on your farm. Take care, thank you, and bye for now.
Cy, thanks again for joining us, mate. It's wonderful having you on this call. What is your take on culture, Cy, and how would you define it? I know we're going to speak about rugby as a bit of a metaphor later on. Here's a start on that. What's your take on culture and what it is?
Jesus, it's such a big subject, and I've been studying culture, I'm going to say it attentively, for the last sort of 7 to 8 years, but it's been on the block for longer than that, because I think culture is really hard to define. But one way I think it usually, people sort of come up with a definition of the way we do things around here, but my definition, and I'm referring back to Michael Henderson a lot today. Michael's an author, he's a corporate anthropologist out of New Zealand, and he's studied something like 70 different cultures across 40 different countries for the last 35 years. So a lot of the material they're referencing today is written and authored by Michael Henderson. He and I have had lots of good chats about this. I've sort of established a bit of a friendship with him because I think everything he's written makes sense to me. So his definition of culture is why we do things the way we do around here. It's culture for me is, if you think about the pillars that make culture up, the values that you have as a family, as a business, as a community, kind of create the culture that we live within. And I wanted to, let's go back to the Latin derivative of the word culture, and it comes from cultus, C-U-L-T-U-S, which means the Latin derivative is cultus, is to care. So if you think of culture as the way we care, the why we do what we do, why we do things the way we do around here, and why we care about the way we do that. So culture is, as soon as you put 2 humans together, culture starts to form, whether you like it or not. Culture, from an anthropological perspective, has been around since the dawn of humanity, and it defines why we do things and the way we do things. It's the unwritten rules with how we choose to operate typically. You see it everywhere in nature where 2 animals get together. So lions have a culture, wolves have a culture, dogs have culture, and you can absolutely in the wild study it and see it. So I know we often refer Hutch to Deming and Buckminster Fuller and so on. And they refer to culture a lot, and it's fundamental when you've got more than two people in a business or in a family or in a community to be able to understand that culture and what's holding it back. So I guess today's a bit of an explorer into what the heck culture is, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. So just in terms of what you've learned with Michael, how do you measure it? Is there a way that he has uncovered that you can kind of get a measure on culture, or is it an intangible in your experience?
Well, the book's called Above the Line, and absolutely your culture is either, there are six, we'll discuss this shortly, there are 6 levels of culture, from all the way from dead right the way through to incredibly successful. And if we unpack some of that today, I think people will be able to measure, determine, or identify about where their culture is in their business or family unit or community. So yeah, you can measure it, and at the end of today, you'll have a really good understanding. If you just think about your family or your business, which is your family unit, many of people on the call, I assume, your culture will be, it's in front of you, it's obvious, it's there regardless, but most people have never taken the chance to A, define it, or B, measure how, on the scale of 1 through 6, where they sit in that culture. So at the end of the day, you'll have a really good idea on how to measure your own culture.
Yeah. Thank you, mate. The reason I put up the Cuda tricolours as an image there wasn't for my own self-importance at all. It's one of the most amazing moments in sport that I've had, where 15 blokes or 20 blokes arrived to a small country town. You know, we've had a few ring-ins, and we created something really quite special in a year and won the premiership for the first time, I think, in, I want to say, 60 years, minor and major premiers. There were a few little rituals that I guess came to pass as we moved through the season that I reflect back on now as basically the reason why we won. Sure, we had some good players in good positions. We were no better than everyone else, but there just some little things that some people did that made a massive impact on our success over the course of the season. And I'll speak about Zam Champagne, this quietly spoken guy in the background here. I'll touch base on him a little later, but I actually think that the whole culture of the whole team sort of was largely as a result of the quiet approach that he took to his role in the team. I'll come back to that later. So jumping into this.
Yeah, being a Kiwi and proud Kiwi, you've got to look at the record that the All Blacks have over now longer than a century of the winningest team of any international team of any code anywhere, the greatest win-loss ratio. And it all comes down to, I believe, that they've got the most incredible set of values and culture. These are them directly off the All Blacks website. If a little nation of 4 million people can, constantly win World Cups and or, series, and they've got the greatest win-loss ratio of any sport over the last 100 years, there's got to be more to it. So in the book, Above the Line, Michael refers to a study that was done, Hutch, by a chap called Mike West from the London School of Economics. And they wanted to try and test the effectiveness on, call it whatever team, whether it's your business or family or community. They wanted to check the effectiveness on culture versus strategy. So going back a little while back, I mentioned that to put 2 people in a room and culture starts forming. Well, for a gazillion years, humans have been forming culture. So culture versus strategy, and Mike West's research says that the strategy is outweighed by culture on an 8-to-1 ratio. So culture, it's 8 times more effective than having the best business culture than it is to have the best business strategy. So strategy, if you've got the best business model on the planet with a very, very poor operating culture, you're 8 times less likely to succeed if the other way around. Ultimately, the two would be right. But if you look at the long-term success rate of All Blacks, it comes down to culture. So they've, I think there's been plenty of examples of where you've seen look at number 1, sweep the sheds. They leave the changing rooms like they found them. Just because they happen to be world champs or they happen to be the All Black, it's not allowed to get to your head. You sweep the sheds regardless of what position you hold on the team. So you can Google this, and it's really interesting to look at, the no dickhead policy and train to win and write your legacy. And so what I find, Hutch, and you've probably found the same thing of working with small businesses over the years, that virtually none of them have taken the time to look at business, the cultural side of the business. So if culture's been around for a gazillion years, business strategy can be traced back to the Dutch East India Trading Company and the king at the time awarding them the rights to go and pillage different parts of the world to take spices and gold and silver. So business strategy has been around, I'm going to say 300 or 400 years, whereas culture's been around since the dawn of humanity. So I think when we talk about culture is bone deep or blood deep, whereas business strategy is very much on the surface. So I guess the message that I'm trying to get across is that this is the unseen, unknown, hidden message that's right in front of your face all the time, that you can actually see if you start to document it. So part of today is making sure that people can understand it, and then how do I document my culture and the values within my business and family unit?
Yeah, so this is perfect, because I think in recent webinars and certainly on their mastermind journey, our clients focus in on their core values and really understanding those as families and as businesses. I actually think this code of conduct, if you like, sits really closely beside, and they need to be intermeshed. But a code of conduct that can underpin culture, I think, is just so important. I love with the All Black construct that the way they've set it up for that rule number 1 is that the most senior capped All Black cleans the shed. And because everyone has deep respect for the longest serving All Black, by the time he gets to cleaning the shed, every other member of the team has already done it, so that there is nothing left to do for the longest standing All Black. Just such a clever ritual compared to probably most other rugby teams at every level of that code, where they walk out and leave the change room in a completely messy state for someone else to worry about. It's little things like that I think can add up to make a massive difference over time. So ritual 13, ritualize to actualize, create a culture. Teams could copy the All Blacks approach to the game wholesale, but that isn't what makes the New Zealand team winners. Their team culture is based on their heritage as a nation and rugby team, which is unique to them. It presents who they are, which is why it works for them. Build a culture based on your collective values.
Yeah, so There you go. That's it. Isn't that clever?
Very clever.
Michael's definition of the book's called Above the Line, and he's defined these 6 levels of culture. And you get to essentially, we're going to show you some words in the next couple of slides on how would you measure your culture currently. I've seen, and I'm sure you've walked into businesses before, and you feel loved and respected and honoured, and they deal with you beautifully, and you buy a product or a service from them, whether it be your accountant or the guy that services your vehicles or fixes machinery or whatever it is, that some businesses have just nailed it. Where other businesses you walk, there's one in town here I won't mention. I live in the beautiful Southern Highlands of New South Wales. There's one particular business that I visit when I absolutely have to, and I feel like I'm interrupting their day as a client. I'm always dealt with in a way that it's kind of like, I wish you weren't here because you're ruining my day. I know that culture's got to be below the line. So there's 3 measures of below the line culture. I guess the disabled part, where you're managing average performance levels, it becomes costly. Dying, you're struggling to compete, and dead, well, you've gone backwards to the point. And there's countless examples of organizations that have, and this is the important thing, Hutch, I didn't cover this on our briefing prior to this meeting, but in the book, Michael refers to, you've read the book From Good to Great by Jim Collins. In that book, there are multiple companies that were referenced as great companies that now don't exist. Interestingly, they thought they had culture right, but new managers come in, new CEOs come in, markets shift, and if you think you got culture right, it's constantly on the move. Potentially, your culture could move from disabled to stable or successful and back again. So it's a never-ending feast, this thing. So there are 15 companies in that book that don't exist anymore, Hutch. Enron, as an example, right? and there's plenty of them. I'm going to suggest that below the line culture, there's no flow. There's more friction involved in doing everything.
So above the line side, do you just want to go through these?
Yep, stable. The culture's performing well, enough to enable the business to attract and retain clients. If you're successful, you're succeeding in your culture. The culture's performing at a high enough level to enable the business to be best in its market. And if you're exceeding, the culture operates in a world-class level that delights customers and employees. So there's another book called Fish that you may have referred to, Hutch. It talks about the fish markets in Seattle and, cutting up fish and scaling and filleting, and it's a pretty dirty, filthy, smelly job. But the Pike Street fish markets in, I think it's Seattle, have the most amazing culture. Worldwide, they're respected. People go to visit their markets because they have so much fun. They've just decided that doing a dirty, filthy, smelly job can actually be fun because it's what you bring to that job which makes it. So they've got a culture that operates at a world-class level, delights customers, employees, and people from around the world will go out of their way to visit the Pike Street markets because of their culture. These are some of the defining moments of cultures that work below the line. If you're finding that you get distraction or sabotage or blame and excuse denials happening, or people are immature or moaning and burning out and stress related, if you find yourself, and maybe take a moment to list 3 or 4 of them if they're happening in your business right now. People have hidden agendas. People are late. They're fearful. They're slow. They're sexist or juvenile or moody. These, and again, being really self-critical to look at the stuff. If any of these things are popping up at your business, you're likely to have, in varying degrees of all of them, you're likely to have a below-the-line culture. Yep.
So probably worthwhile, guys, this is our chance to be brutally honest with ourselves. Maybe just grab some words, just take some moment to read through these. And if you feel like some of these are consistent with the culture that you have, now's your chance to just write those down on a bit of paper, because once you put them on paper and acknowledge them, then we can do something about that.
It's fair to say that having a toxic or a below-the-line culture is actually your first competitor. So it's not the price, it's not the quality, it's not the supply level, it's got nothing to do with it. But if you are unable to work with your client base or the people who buy your product, and you don't answer the phone right, it's slow to invoice, whatever it is you're selling, if you've got a really poor culture, then people won't want to do business with you. But you'll never figure that out. You'll always think it's a competitor or someone else had better something. Your culture is actually your first competitor if it's below the line. Did that kind of make sense, Hutch?
Yeah, it does. I mean, one of the best definitions I've heard of culture is quite simply what is said about you and your company when your employees are having a barbecue with their friends. So if last Saturday they arrived, or one of your employees was arrived at a barbecue and was asked, what's it like to work for Jeremy, or what's it like to work for Farm Owners Academy, what they say in that moment is the essence of your culture. So you can also think about this from the standpoint of what might your staff say about your culture. There might be a few other adjectives that come to the fore in addition, but worthwhile just doing a brutal assessment of where we're at.
These are the typical aspects of people that run businesses with an above-the-line culture. Trust, sharing truth, collaboration, motivation, appreciation, focus, pride, effort. They're all, high ethics, punctuality. It's pretty much the opposite of what you just seen on the other page, really. But these are all describing. Humor's a big part of it, right? Humor's fun, synergy. We become creative the way that we solve problems because we're prepared to go the extra mile.
So once again, maybe on the other half of your bit of paper, just maybe grab a couple of these that capture the essence of the culture that you have at the moment. It's a really useful exercise to do. I'm looking at our Farm Owner Academy culture with our core team sign. There are some absolute descriptors there for us, I feel.
Momentum's huge. Having an above-the-line culture enables you to tap into discretionary effort. If you've got a culture that represented by some of the words on this page here, it's definitely above the line. And if, let's say things aren't working out quite well, machinery breaks, or we need to put in extra time to make hay or stack, whatever it is, and people are going to clock off at 5 or 3, whatever time they clock off. That's not above the line culture, but an above the line culture enables people will happily donate their time, go the extra mile, and you get to tap into that wonderful resource that a below the line culture would not allow you to tap into, that discretionary effort.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there are people that will go the extra mile but then complain about being asked to do it until the cows come home. And then there are people that do it just because they care. And the degree to which they care, to your point before, comes back to how well we have set the culture that supports them. Absolutely.
So again, when I talk about friction and flow, things happen easily in above the line culture. Things just happen to work beautifully. Your business is in a constructive mode rather than a destructive or resistant mode. So I think this is just another way to look at it from a series of abilities for the business to overachieve, like the All Blacks. They seem to outperform statistically because their culture is probably at the highest level. And we're inspired, we aim at excellence, we share well, we're insightful, we're humble. And if you hear any of the All Black captains do a speech at the end of, picking up an award or, end of the season, the first thing they do is acknowledge their competitors for putting up a spirited effort. I know that's now common knowledge and common way of speaking, but humility is all part of the way they operate. And very rarely do you see All Blacks in the newspaper for drug, alcohol, sex scandals at all. Just not part of their culture at all.
Your point, Si, that it's interesting that they've got a method for how they turn up post-game to that captain's interview, that there's a system there for how they deliver to that, one of which is we acknowledge the opposition first. There's a lot of rigor and a lot of depth to how they bring their code of conduct to life, isn't there?
And the rituals around the haka at the start of the game, all of those things are a part of what an excelling culture and their traits, and they're just a living billboard for an above the line culture.
So constructive cultures, above the line cultures. I'm just looking at stable, content, productive, calm, safe, consistent, friendly, outward focus.
And there's nothing wrong with that culture, right?
Yeah, that was my question, Si. Is it okay to have a stable culture and not necessarily, you think about it in a farming context where it's all about timeliness and adapting to the season and having a team that is dependable, because we're not necessarily in the customer service space like the Ritz-Carlton or the Hilton. Is it okay to have a stable culture and not necessarily shoot for excellence in this?
Look, I look at, my family culture, which we defined, the Harris family culture, and I'm really happy to aim at stable in there. I don't necessarily want my family culture to be exceeding or completely abstract or symbolic. This is just about us. I think if you're running a high performance business and you want to be a world beater in what you're doing and you want to strive for excellence in everything you do, go for the top. If you're quite happy to be stable and consistent, and this is kind of like, in a way, your risk profile. Do I want to invest in blue chip shares, or do I want to go for the high performance ones? And there's always going to be a risk in whichever way you go. I think for many of the farming community, it might be quite acceptable to be stable, It might be quite acceptable.
There's productive and courage. What's meant by those 2 points?
Well, if you think about the sort of left-hand side of, if you cut this down the middle, the productive side is all around being productive. Being challenged, but then what courage level do I need to have in order to pull that off? And the word dull right above that is probably might be seen by those at the top level to be somewhat dull, but dull's not bad. Dull's quite happy. How much courage does it take for you to be right at the top end, loving and purposeful and distinguished? I mean, they may not be courage traits that you want to live by, So I think if you look at the way that sort of sliding scale works, is one's productive and one takes a certain amount of courage to get where you need to get to.
Yeah. And so interestingly here, below the line, resistant culture where there's friction, not flow, again, there's some useful adjectives here that probably help people understand where their culture's at. Pessimistic, draining, closed-minded, reactionary, demanding. I think, I want to speak quite plainly that sometimes in multi-generational businesses, the younger generation might inherit the prior generation's beliefs and values. And now it might be that the prior generation had a culture up here of succeed or even stable, but sometimes we do step into family businesses and take on the culture that comes our way, and sometimes that can be perhaps in the disabled space or hopefully not in the other two. But I guess what I'm wanting to explore now, Si, is how do we move cultures? How can we shift from disabled to stable or stable to success, or even dying and further up the ladder?
I think the first step would be a stock take of where it's at right now, because no one, unless you've read the book, would have seen any of these measurements by with which culture can be, judged. And again, it's a personal measurement. Our parents and their parents came through some pretty awful times with world wars and Great Depressions and so on, and who knows what they're going to spawn out of where we are now. But they've brought that culture to the family and those values. Our parents in and around money will say things like it doesn't grow on trees and it's easy to spend and hard to earn. They've got lots of beliefs that they've inherited from their parents, which then grows a culture accordingly. I guess this is an opportunity with the next generation coming in, is to not make a wholesale change. Because if you're still in business after 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years of however many generations of the farm's been in the family for, you've done some things right. But the book Good to Great, where there are many companies that thought they had it right and they froze it and said, that's good, we're not changing, I think that could lead to disastrously dropping down that ladder. It's a really good opportunity, just to measure where you're at right now and decide, are we okay with that? Are we good? Are things not right that we need to improve? And recognizing, I think that one of the most favorite sayings I've had about parents is that they're to be loved, not understood. You don't understand what their lives were like, what was like, their parents used to take the hand to them, or you've got no idea. I know that my wife's parents had a disastrous growing up as childhood, and their parenting style matched that, which is not the parenting style. We've decided to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, get that culture, but we need to write our own culture and move forward from here. So it is, you'll do a self-assessment, you'll figure out where you're at and go, yep, either happy here or we need to move it. If you need to move it, then start.
I think it's a really fair point that we've got to be just so respectful and empathetic of prior generations in intergenerational businesses. And maybe the starting point is to change how I turn up and how my family, the culture of my family, before I necessarily try and change the broader family team. Yeah. Tell me about this one, Si, because this is where that whole construct of an arrow comes in, which I think's really quite compelling when you look at culture this way.
The analogy that Michael uses in his book, his book has actually changed. It's shifted to the arrow. So if you think about your business or family culture, whatever you like to call it, as an arrow, there's multiple parts to an arrow. Culture can be considered to be the soft and fluffy stuff. What do we need to talk about culture for? We're farmers. We don't need a lot of culture. I can see that potentially some people on this call may be considering, what do I need to talk about culture for? Well, if you think about I think they're called the arrow, the feathers on the arrow, I think it's called fletchings. Without the fletchings on an arrow, we've got the best business strategy that's not going to hit the objective. The fletchings on the end give it direction, enable it to fly in a straight, even though it's spinning, a straight line, just like a bullet. It's, they come out spinning. Without that, then we are kind of directionless. Our performance drops, even though we've got the best business strategy without a great culture. So I think Michael's soft, fluffy stuff kind of comment in and around the feathers it describes culture beautifully. It puts us in a position whereby without a great culture, our business will probably lose direction and nowhere near hit its target. So my comments in and around that is your objective might be at market share or a certain price or a price per kilo or a weight related thing. If it's beef, if you're growing beef, sales that happen, however you measure it, you've got a certain objective to be able to meet. Your strategy is your farming techniques and how you manage your farm. The performance part of the people that hold it all together and make the work happen. The culture part is the thing that keeps it all straight as an arrow, if that's a good way to describe it. And you can't have an arrow without all. There's actually 4 components. There's this wonderful little piece right on the end where the string sits called the knock. I haven't quite figured out what that one is, but maybe that's your code of conduct, if you like, Hutch. That's keeps you on the straight and narrow with the string there, ready to pull. But this is the best analogy I've seen to try and help people understand the soft fluffiness around culture is probably one of the most important parts. But you take one out and it's not going to work. You take the strategy out, not going to work. So yeah, beautiful little analogy, I thought.
And it might be fair to say, Si, that a lot of us might focus on goals and targets and strategy, and others might focus on, the effective performance in the paddock with the team or on farm. But it's probably fair to say that a lot of us overlook the importance of the soft, fluffy bit at the end of the arrow, which, to your point, probably determines a huge proportion of this arrow's ability to hit the target.
Yeah. So culture delivers performance, whereas strategy directs it.
Mm-hmm.
You get that?
Yeah. Yep.
Culture directs performance, culture delivers performance, whereas strategy directs it.
So you talk about soft and fluffy. What do you mean by that? And what are some examples that you have of companies getting that culture piece or the soft and fluffy piece right, Si?
We're used to facts and data and numbers and measurements, and we're used to all of those things. We understand business strategy well. We understand how to put it all together. But what we miss is what a lot of people might refer, like I used to, I've got to do that culture fluffy stuff thing. I've got to hug trees. I've got to do a 2-day offsite. We'll get to hold hands. And that's what a lot of people think about culture. And I used to dismiss it in the exact same way. So interesting, the analogy on the feathers are soft and fluffy too. So I think your second part of your question is companies that get it right. Look, everyone on this call would have had a phenomenal customer service experience, and everyone on the call would have had the exact opposite. And it's those businesses that get it right are the ones that deliver phenomenal results to the bottom line. And there's countless examples of businesses that get it right. Those of you on the call that might know of a very interesting business in Cooma, New South Wales, called Bird's Nest. No, Hutch, I know you know them well, and I've done a tour through their business. They get culture right. They started off as the gentleman's outfitters in Cooma, and I think Cooma, there's probably a population of, 2,500, 3,000 during the off-season?
It's a little bit more than that, but yeah, it's a small country town. Yep.
They now have moved to a completely online business with a bit of, retail, and they ship something like 2,500 items every day around the world, throughout Australia and the rest of the world. They employ 142 people in this very small-ish town, and it just blows me away. We asked the CEO of this business, we had her in the boardroom, and we asked her the question, so what is your job? As CEO of this company, what's your job? And she goes, I've got 2 functions. The first is bright, shiny objects. So she likes to invent new ways to treat customers well and create new visions and ideas and ways of interacting. But she can create the idea, but she's not allowed to implement it. And the second thing, she goes, I'm guardian of culture. And to the uneducated in the room, we said, what does that mean? Is that a fluffy term? They've spent many years getting their culture right. They hire by it, they fire by it, they promote by it. Their culture is so strong, you can actually walk into the business and feel people that are happy to be there. You kind of pick up on this really amazing positive energy about that business. It just hums. And for them to poke out 2,500 items every day with a handwritten note, I might add, on each product is just phenomenal. And you get that they get culture really, really well. There's another crowd in the US called Zappos. They're an online shoe business. They went from 0 to $1 billion with a B dollars in sales. And one of their strongest business strategies is having a most incredible culture. They were bought by Amazon, and Amazon said, we're not going to touch you. Keep doing exactly what you do. Don't change your culture. Don't become an Amazon. Just do what you do because you're doing fantastic. So there's plenty of examples of where companies have got it right, and the bottom line numbers are just staggering.
Yep. I reflect back as you're talking on growing up on our family farm, and I distinctly remember two things. We had two men that worked with us and their families on farm, one for 38 years, I think it was, the other one 32, Barry and Trevor. And I can't recall either of them having a bad word to say about my old man to me. I'm sure they might have to others, but they were always very respectful, and Dad was a very understated, quiet achiever. But two things. One is every Friday morning, almost without fail, outside shearing and harvest, we would meet at the sheds at 7 o'clock and spend an hour and a half cleaning the sheds. And then at 8:30, Mum would bring a cake over and we'd have morning tea. And that meant that we started next week organised. And that whole hour and a half, all we'd be doing was talking about, where we were up to and what we needed to do next week. So that ritual, perhaps an unnecessary, a soft and fluffy potentially, certainly the tea cake and the cup of tea at the end on a Friday. A lot of cultures don't stop for those sorts of things. But the camaraderie that was built over that hour and a half and then that morning tea, I will always remember it as a young person being part of that. And the other one that speaks to me is if my brothers and I arrived to the sheds at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, ready for work at the allotted time, and we hadn't shaved, we would be sent home to shave. And so there's just, I sort of think back to the code of conduct that the New Zealand rugby team have, and those soft and fluffy rituals like cleaning the change rooms respectfully. I think the soft and fluffy can be the thing that absolutely sets you apart from every other culture. And we're, as farmers, we are trying to stand out as an employer and attract really good people with great attitude. The soft and fluffy things can be the thing that differentiates us. So I guess I'd love for people listening to stop and, we spend a lot of time on our strategic planning, on our VTOs, on making sure we've got annual and quarterly and monthly and weekly times for meetings, and it's great to see all of that happening. But in addition to those things, what are the rituals that underpin who you are and how you do what you do? To Si's point before, are there Christmas rituals, Easter rituals? Is there a post-harvest or post-shearing ritual that you can become famous for? Coaching a client recently that middle of the drought, shearing, putting in feedlots, just a really intense year. The fires came over, and I said to the guys at the end of that, so did you have a cutout before Christmas? They'd just finished shearing and harvest in a drought condition, and I said, oh no, we didn't have time. And I stopped and really hammered them on that point, that they've got about 15 farm staff outside their piggery going the extra mile in more ways than one, and they did nothing really to acknowledge them in the lead up to Christmas. So for me, that's not what we're talking about. And so I'd love for you to stop and think about what are the rituals at key moments throughout the year or in any given day or any given week that absolutely set you apart as an employer and absolutely sets your family business out from others in your region and even nationally. I think it's a really good point, Guy. And I think the rituals that we put in place that might be soft and fluffy, this arrow really does sort of tie it up nicely, that it actually is the thing that directs the success of your company.
Yeah, look, it'd be fair to say that culture elevates and stabilizes collective human performance. Yeah, just like the feathers, the fletching on the end of the arrow. Elevates and stabilizes collective human performance.
Si, a question from Diana. How can small businesses better build culture, move it to where they want it or we want it to be? And a question for you, what are some practical tips and hints you would give us, things we might practically do?
Great question. I work with lots and lots of small businesses, and invariably we get to the point where we've got to actually define culture, and then I guess to try and understand the essence of why they do what they do in their businesses. And the easiest way to do that, when I get a big A3 bit of paper and I ask the team, what is it that you love about this business? What is it that makes it really special? And they'll say like, oh, we love our customers. Oh, okay, customer intimacy, right? And I'll spend 30 minutes drawing out all of the things, the words that come out of their mouth. It might be as simple as, we have fun around here. Great fun, there's another one. Essentially what I'll then do is to try and group those words in logical groupings, and then to try and wrap a little 1 or 2 word statement around, we do fun well, for example. We love our clients. We respect each other. In my family values, we did the exact same thing, Deanna. We sat around as a family and said, what's important to us? How do we define the way we do things? And we came up with love and respect and communication, individuality, family, health, wealth, and all these things. And then we started to think, well, what is it about individuality? We're a collective group of 7 in our family, yet we've got our individualness, and we can be individual and follow our own path if we want to. So, step number 1, get yourself a big piece of paper, and as a family unit, sit around the kitchen table or dining table and just talk about the way the business operates, not how you want it to be, how it is now. And then you'll see some logical groupings, and then you can start to, this is probably a 6-month process, Deanna. It's not going to happen like that. You can't go, let's just do culture, right? Yep, next. It actually takes a little while for you to define it. Most clients that I work with, 3 to 6 months before they absolutely nail it. And when you've got it right, it sort of sends a bit of a shiver down your spine. You go, yeah, that's exactly who we are. That's how we operate. So it's a bit of a process. Marathon, not a sprint, and your job is to actually, first step, just document some of the things that happen around family.
Yeah, thanks, Di. What I would comment on there, Deanna, is firstly that review, even going back over the flip charts that we've shared so far and just getting an assessment of where you're at. Then I would probably, to your point, Si, it's finding out what people like and don't like about the culture that you have. So having that conversation can be really important, and sometimes it's worthwhile bringing in a coach or someone from outside the company to interview your team and to get that really straight feedback on what they like and don't like. And then it's moving in, I think, to the core values exercise, which is a bit like what Si talked about, which is what are the values that are going to underpin who we are and how we want to be. And then I think it's with those values working on what are the rituals that are going to set us apart. We start at this time, we clean up after ourselves, we tidy the workshop at this time, we have breaks at this time. Easter we celebrate this way, successful milestones throughout the year we celebrate that way. I think it's the rituals that can really set our culture up, in addition to being a good leader and communicating strongly and leading people well and being respectful and all of those other things that we need to be as a leader. It's coming up with the combination of rituals that I think can bring your people together, immediate team and even your subcontractor and off-farm supply team, to make you unique and different compared to other employees about. I hope that's helpful. Now, Robert missed a word, Si. Culture elevates and stabilizes. What was that phrase that you just used?
Culture elevates and stabilizes collective human performance. Something like 91% of organizations do not truly understand what culture is, and less than 10% of leaders see or understand culture, when oftentimes it's right under your nose. In FedEx, the shortest way between 2 points is a straight line, an arrow's head in a straight line. The shortest way to answer customer queries is a straight line. Answer them short, sharp, like an arrow. everything they do in business is about getting from A to B as quick as possible. So part of their culture, in a way, very, very clever in the way they put their logo together, is right under your nose. You've seen that probably 1,000 times, and not many of you, or maybe some of you have. But I guess the point is culture is under your nose. It's there. Your job is to define it and then work with it to build a really high-performing, above-the-line cultural business.
Couple of questions. What's the difference between values and culture? From a couple of people, we've spent a lot of time working on core values at farm owners. So I might just touch on that briefly. I think there is a really important process to go through to find your core values. Your culture is kind of how then you bring it to life. So you might have heard me talk about core values. So integrity, honesty, trust, respect, excellence might be your core values. Then we've got to go 2 and 3 levels deep on each of those. And so the second level, if excellence is a core value, then the next question to ask is, how do we do excellence? And how do we be excellent? And we've got to come up with a definition of what excellence means to us. I'm predicting this is how the All Blacks created their code of conduct, is that they came up with a core value and then defined what that meant for them. And then the third level down, and this is where the rubber hits the road, is the rituals around which you can bring that core value to life. And then as a leader, the quality of your attention to those rituals and the way you lead people to make sure that those rituals happen, that they're honoured, that they're consistently executed, and that they're made a priority is the thing that can bring your culture to life. They're very linked. Core values are the first level. I think that second level, which defines them uniquely for you, and then that third level, which is the combination of rituals that help you bring those core values to life. I think that's where core values and culture connect. Si, would you have anything to add there in terms of that interplay between core values and culture?
Yeah, I think a really simple definition is the core values that you have with those individual one-word definitions. If you line them up, your culture would sit on top of all of those values. So your core is a group definition for all the values that you hold to be true about why you do things around here.
So I thank you for your time. I think really useful to do 3 things from this. One is to stop and do that assessment of the culture that you have now and the degree to which you think it's above and below the line. If it's below the line, look at what systems, what statements, what code of conduct, what rituals we can be putting in place to move from where we are to the culture that we want. Whether we like it or not, Deming made a great point that fish genuinely stink from the head down. And so everything rises and falls on our leadership. And with that for things to change, first I must change. So if we leave culture to happen around us, we won't get what we absolutely want, which is a high-performing culture. So we've got to take complete responsibility for this. We've got to absolutely lead the conversation around core values, around what they mean to us, what the rituals are that are going to help us as a team, but equally be the change that you want to see. So look at how you can turn up and be a great example of the culture that you want to have, and in so doing, inspire others to come along for the ride.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.